Humility, equity, anti-racism, lateral kindness, inclusivity, and trauma-informed, these are key aspects that we as a collective are asked to bring into our everyday lives, our work lives, so we can share space with each other, with humility, with kindness. I'm so excited to bring in amazing voices, social change leaders in the Prince George area, so that together we can hear about why it matters, what got them interested in what they represent in the community, and maybe even some tips for other leaders in the community of how to best serve all people. I'm really looking forward to this journey together. Welcome to the trauma-informed episode for Hope and Healing in the North. We've now come through humility, equity, anti-racism, lateral kindness, inclusivity, and today's guest is Shirley Hogan, Canadian Mental Health Association's Education Manager here in Prince George. She is sharing with us her wisdom, her knowledge, her life experience relating to how to be more trauma-informed. And so I really hope that you enjoy tuning into this episode, as becoming trauma-informed is something that we are all asked to do and show up for not only others, but also ourselves, as you'll see that we uncover in this episode. Well, yeah, welcome, Shirley.
Thank you.
I'm really happy to have you here talking about trauma-informed practice and
Yeah.
hopefully inspiring people in the North that are actively working with other humans. And humans are complex beings.
Yeah. We're all complex beings, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And having that trauma-informed lens on our work and on ourselves is so vitally important for the work that we're doing.
Yeah. So do you want to introduce yourself in a way that's meaningful to you?
Sure. So my name is Shirley Hogan. I currently work for the Canadian Mental Health Association as Manager of Education and Projects. And so I've teach lots of different types of topics. And one of the ones that we touch on is trauma, especially in the mental health first aid. And I think that it's something that is near and dear to my heart. I, like many other people, have experienced trauma in my past. And so that's a little bit who I am. And I'm really happy to be here. Thank you for the invite.
Thanks for sharing your wisdom. Trauma-informed is becoming a lot more understood, but I'm wondering, what does trauma-informed mean to you?
For me, trauma-informed means just having the basic understanding that the majority of people have experienced some sort of trauma. And when we talk about trauma, it's really, I think that it's really important that we don't focus too much on what the actual experience was. It's really what was the response to that experience. Right? So how did that experience impact the individual? Because when we're looking at being trauma-informed, that's what we want to be aware of, right? Am I intuitive to how these behaviors might be a response to something that's happened years previous or recently?
So how would you define trauma?
So trauma can be anything really that somebody, a traumatic experience, it would be anything that somebody might experience that at the time was too large or too difficult or too out of the blue or too hard to understand for the brain to be able to really comprehend what was going on. And so then different things happen, like our systems are really set up for survival. Hey, as humans, we are really set up for survival, and we have like our fight, flight, and freeze response, are all those survival techniques that we have. And when somebody experiences something that it's too overwhelming for them at the time, then they will have a trauma response, and that will look different for a lot of different people. Some people might not even remember the event. Like they might completely black out the entire event, and that could be for years and years. Somebody will have no recollection of what happened. And then when they're in a safer place or something is different in their life, those feelings can come back, those memories can come back, and it can be really scary for people. And that's what I consider to be the trauma response. The traumatic event was the thing that triggered that response to happen.
The traumatic response the traumatic event was what triggered the initial one, or after?
All of them.
Okay.
So for some people, not everybody will forget, right? Some people will remember and that's the problem with trauma, is that because we're all so individual, our responses can be very individual too. And so some people, after having a traumatic experience, will be able to remember that in detail, almost even in slow motion for some people. Everything will be clear to them in their memory. Somebody else, as I say, can completely block it out. A different person, number 3, might remember it, but chronologically, the order can be very different of how it happened, and the memories can be scattered. And then that can also, then when we take that type of memory and years later or a short time later, the person is trying to look back and make sense of what happened, it can be very confusing, right? Because there's blank spots or things that just don't make sense. And then the person feels, I can't really tell anybody about this because I can't even make sense of it myself. Or maybe they feel like I'm not going to be believed, or it's so difficult for folks.
Yeah. Do you know, are there numbers known on how many people do have that traumatic experience that they're not aware of?
I don't know the actual numbers, but I know that certainly that memory blocking it can happen for years. It can just be a short term, but it can also, people will remember things like years and years later. And I don't know the exact numbers of that. I just am aware that that can happen for folks. And the tricky thing for that, when that happens, is that sometimes they're having different responses. Like maybe there's different things that they're on, situations where they're uncomfortable, or different scents that sort of give them this body feeling that they don't know what's going on for them. And if they don't have the actual memory to associate with that, it can feel very scary for people.
Yeah.
Yeah, so when we're talking to people and working with folks, it's important that we really try to start to understand that some of the behaviors that we're seeing, that maybe in the past we thought this person is uncooperative or unwilling or unable to participate in the help or the program or whatever, that maybe if we look at it from a different perspective and looked at it, maybe so much as not unwilling, but unable, and then how come?
Yeah.
How come they're unable? Where's that blockage for them?
Or overwhelm.
Yeah.
Avoiding the overwhelm would be a pretty standard coping response to that overwhelm.
And that can be how people do that. It will, again, be just as individual as we are as people, right? Some people will shut down and they go into that freeze response in the moment, and they just shut right down, and maybe they just stop participating in the conversation, or it's like you're looking at them but they're not really there. Other people, their response might be that kind of fight, and then all of a sudden now they're angry and they're fighting, like they're arguing back with you on something that you're like, I don't even know why this was an argument, right? And it can be, again, very confusing to be like, why are they so difficult to work with, without understanding that, you know what, maybe there's some trauma that has somehow brought up for them. And when we can understand that, we can just approach it just a tiny bit differently.
When you talk about that in people's responses, I think about stereotyping and how quick people can be to stereotype or discriminate a person having an uncomfortable experience and then response to that.
Yeah.
When they're acting that out. And so it might make it even more challenging for them to seek help.
And we know it's already really difficult to seek help, right? The stereotypes, the judgment, the stigma around any sort of mental health is still alive and prevalent in our culture. And so we really, again, we want to be really well aware of that. And I love, actually, it's Gabor Mate who I heard him say, instead of saying to people, what's wrong with you, why don't we start saying what happened to you? Right? And really having that better understanding of the individual and not necessarily so worked up on the behaviors in the moment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because it'll become a safer space.
Exactly. And that's really how we start to heal. We start to be able to create those safe spaces so that people can begin to start to tell their story. And even when we talk about healing from trauma, it's telling our story is really important for us to be able to share that, right? But then there's also things that we want to be able to do for our, like the automatic responses that we have. And how do we learn to, as individuals, turn off those responses or work through them, process them in the moment? Right?
So that's the freeze, flight, fight, fawn responses, and they can come up autonomically, which means we don't necessarily get a say. They're from a stimulant in the environment.
Exactly. And stimulus in the environment, and it's something will happen and it will trigger that response. What we're understanding more and more, though, that there are things that we can do to turn off that response. Right? Yeah. And that's so powerful. And that's again, we have to be able to tell our story so that we can put it into context and we can understand it and get a better picture of who we are, and the people that are helping us or loving us or supporting us or in our lives in any way can have a better understanding of who we are and why we are. But then once we understand that, then we can also be like, you know what, I don't have to be like this anymore then.
Then it's liberating.
Yeah.
You have power over yourself again.
Yeah, I can say, I just suddenly, like, my whole insides just feel frozen.
Yeah.
Instead of being, what's wrong with me? Why am I like this? What's the matter? Why can't I do it better? If we can learn to say, oh, that's because this is reminding me of that very scary thing that I went through before, and I'm not in that place anymore. I can take a breath, and I can be, whew, that was scary for a second. I almost went into my old trauma response and ran away out of here, or wanted to argue with you, or whatever it was, or please you, or totally break all my own boundaries so that I could help you feel good, or whatever what I've perceived to be would do that, right? And we can have the understanding of, I don't have to do any of that anymore. And it's very empowering and freeing. Yeah.
I was shown this somatic kind of mind-body connection response that's taught by Dr. Peter Levine. And you put your hand under your specifically left armpit like this, and then over here on your right shoulder. And your parasympathetic nervous system kicks in, and it really, truly works.
Yeah, it really, truly works.
It's interesting, because I just thought if we're talking about tools, the listener might go, what kind of tools turn it off?
Yeah.
What are other tools that work?
So that's a great one. Breathing can be very helpful. Now, it doesn't work for everybody. We all do it, right? We all do it every day, every minute. On some level, we're all breathing, but that real sort of conscious taking breaths, right? So many of us, especially if we have a history of trauma, we're in that fight, flight, or freeze place, and we're breathing from here. Right? And this is where we've learned to breathe from, and we don't really use all of our diaphragm and take those big, deep breaths. And those can be very powerful for a lot of people. Yeah.
I'm doing new vocal training, and of course with vocal training you need to. So I'm noticing the softening that's happening on a deeper level because of my bigger diaphragmatic breath.
Yeah, and it's really, once you start doing it and you start getting the positive effects from it, then you just want to keep doing it, really, right? Because it's, this actually works. Yeah. And there's, we're learning so much more around the idea of, the other thing that can happen is that sometimes trauma can be almost like a form of energy in a sense, right? I always like to really simplify things, just to make it as simple as we can, almost like a type of energy. And what can happen is that energy can get locked in different parts of our body, right? And so when something happens, it's like when you're experiencing that, where are you really feeling it in your body? And sometimes people will feel it in places like maybe in their hips or their knees or their shoulders or neck or jaw or different places, their stomach. And it's just breathe into that area or focus on that area and just let that go. Just allow that to be, and remind yourself that's a feeling, and it's a feeling from a past event, and you're safe now, and so you can let that feeling go. And then we just allow that to process to happen, and we start to take control over those things again.
Nice.
Yeah.
So that's really great for tips for individuals that want to come back to themselves again and not be in those spaces. And so I'm also curious, for trauma, what's the difference between having had traumatic experiences and having PTSD?
The two can be very similar in the sense that they both really do stem from a traumatic experience. It's really the difference is the way in which the responses will show up. Okay. Yeah, so with PTSD, there's some very specific things that will happen. And with trauma, it could be similar and different. The trauma so for some people, the other thing though with the trauma is that because trauma, the idea of trauma is it can be confusing still to understand that sometimes something that we might perceive, like our brain might say, oh, that was nothing. Right? Just ignore, like lots of people had it worse than you, or that wasn't so bad. Then what we do is we don't allow it to have the voice that it should have. Whereas when someone has PTSD, oftentimes that diagnosis comes because they've reached out and sought help for that. Okay. Right? So they were well aware of the fact that something happened that had an effect on them. Right? So sometimes when we're looking at trauma, it's really, like I said, it's very similar, and it's just sometimes just the way in which the diagnosis, PTSD is more of a diagnosable illness. Trauma is really something that most people have experienced, right? Yeah. So just looking at it in like that, if we think about it with depression, right? We've all felt sad, but we haven't all had the diagnosis of depression. Right.
I do know, the reason I ask is because I notice that because trauma is more talked about, it's very common people may say they have PTSD when they may not have had the diagnosis. It's just one of those phrases used more, just like narcissism. A lot of people aren't diagnosed with narcissistic personality disorder, but that term is certainly used a lot.
And that's one of the things with why language is so important. Language really is so important, and we do that same thing with depression or anxiety. We do it with everything, really. OCD, you hear that one all the time too. Yep. And a lot of people, I have OCD. They were never diagnosed with it.
No, they just like to tidy a lot.
Yeah,
totally. Okay. Yeah. Thank you for clarifying. I think those pieces are important to clarify.
I do too, because sometimes then what can happen is we think we're both talking about oranges, but we're talking, one person's talking about apples, the other person's talking about oranges. Yeah. And so we do really want to be able to understand that our language is really important. And the other thing too, I think especially in today's world we have our Google Doctor, right? And it's so easy to nowadays just Google sort of anything that we see going on for us, and we can end up in a situation where we're labeling ourselves, and if we're not careful with that, we can be putting ourselves in a box and limiting ourselves. Whereas it's really important to be able to understand and to know to ask for help, but we also want to make sure we ask for help with the appropriate places, not just Googling it by ourselves in the middle of the night. Yeah, because that can open up the conversation, but we don't want to leave it there.
Yes. So then what would complex trauma be?
So complex trauma is really where the person it's more sort of that trauma, and then where there was no treatment has happened for it, right? So the symptoms that the person was having have extended themselves, and now it's become like it's more complex, right? The other thing with complex trauma is sometimes people will have one layer of something, and then they have another layer of something, and then another layer of something, and it's all becomes now intertwined with each other, and it can become very difficult to determine what exactly is this response related to, and then how do I manage my feelings around this particular response? Right. Because there's so many different layers to it. So it could be because of this, it could be because of this, or it could be because of this, and it becomes very difficult to try to unravel that.
And should people try to isolate and know where it comes from in order to have proper treatment or healing? Or are there usually ways and approaches that are just helping?
I think it really would depend on that individual, right? Like I think each individual, again, we're all a little bit different, right? We're all the same and we're all a little bit different. So somebody would really have to make sure that they're getting the proper support. The other thing that we want to make sure that we're doing, particularly with trauma, is that we're talking to someone, like the support that we're getting is trauma informed, right? Because we do know that the other thing is that just reliving our trauma over and over, just the experience of it is actually not always healing, right? There used to be many years ago, I remember when we very first started talking about trauma, and we very first started talking about PTSD, and there was a lot of idea around the fact that like just telling the story and normalizing it and telling it over and over is going to be what's going to heal it. But we know today that we also have to be careful of that, because we can re-traumatize ourselves, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Again, it really is going to depend on that individual and the support that they're getting, right? What is the suggested support from their practitioner? Yeah.
No, I appreciate you unpacking the differences. I think it's useful for when we talk about more intensively the trauma-informed practice and what that looks like, so that we start off with these defining terms. So I'm curious about systemic trauma then, and when you talk about keeping on reliving it, there's instances, I think, where oppressed groups are constantly living in their trauma then if they're constantly in the system that has harmed them.
And even as a society, there's things that we can do different. And each individual agency, actually, there's different things that we can do to start to become more trauma informed, right? And it really can begin with just, what is the feel when I come in here? What is the atmosphere? If some of my trauma comes from working with systems that were difficult for me, and I am now in that same system with the same sort of idea, right? Then is there any sort of, where's the safety here, right? And there are ways that we can start to practice differently so that it does become more safe, and being aware of things like even just what is our entrance way? What is our signage like, right? Are we putting rules up right away? So as soon as you come in, it's just like all these rules, and are we just starting right away with, here's your paper and I don't have a smile for you and I don't care about your name or anything? Just those little things can make such a difference, huge difference. Yeah.
Because it's truly viscerally felt when a place feels warm and inviting.
You can really feel it. Yeah. And those kinds of, just those small changes, and those are not like really big, expensive renovations that we have to do. It can really be just that small change in how do we approach people. Yeah. Like even in some of our institutions, and we have some of our people that have been like they're having to go to the same institution over and over again and reliving everything that's happening. Sometimes they're reliving an event that happened 6 months ago, but they're starting off, and it's been over and over the same event, the same experience. They've been having the same experience, but every time before they even open the door, they're ready for it. They're already prepared for it, and they're coming in a bad mood, ready to fight, and then our poor worker there is feeling defeated and ready to fight right back, as opposed to sometimes if we can change that, if we can support that in a different way. Yeah.
Recognizing that their fight response it's not personal against that person.
Exactly. Yeah.
They're in a protector mode for themselves.
Yes, yeah. And our institutions sometimes have set people up that they have to be in protector mode, right? And so then to go back and to build that trust, rebuild that trust, there is some work there that has to be done. It has to be a real collaborative approach, and people have to really be working on it together. So to take someplace and say, okay, we're going to start to be trauma informed, we have to get everybody on board, right? And we have to all really work together to say, how are we going to start to approach people differently?
To prioritize it.
Yeah, and to just really have that different lens on it, right? And stop seeing that when someone is angry that it's because they don't like us, or they're in a bad mood, or they're never cooperative, or they don't want our help, or all that old story, right? Yeah. And see the person behind that behavior.
Right? I call it trauma armor. Yeah. And it's like people aren't able to relate then for who they truly are, like you said.
Yeah, and we spend our whole lives then just being in this defensive person, and our real authentic person is just being protected behind all that, but missing out.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And when you talk about trust being rebuilt, it's those little things. So what is epigenetic trauma?
So that is really that trauma that lives in our DNA almost, right? Like it's in our DNA. I know I'm a Métis lady. So my mom's family is from the Sandy Bay First Nation in Manitoba. And when we talk about this, I love to just share a story about it. For example, I've had white privilege my whole life, right? Most people look at me and they just see someone who gets to have white privilege. My mom didn't really necessarily have that, right? So you could see from when you looked at my mom, you could see that that's where she came from, and my grandmother even more so. And my mom, I'd have to take her someplace, like maybe to Service Canada, or we'd take her to the doctor. And before we even got there, she was already in a bad mood. Like she already didn't want them to help her, and she didn't want to have to tell them, and they were just wanting her money, or they were just wanting this. And I remember when I was younger and I would get so frustrated with her, right? And I'd be like, Mom, why can't you just be nice to these people? Like, why do you have to start off with a fight every time? And then when I became trauma informed and I understood, oh, that's what's going on there. And then when I began to understand that, and then I realized, you know what, some of those genes that are there, I've actually got some of those too. And really what that is that, again, humans are meant for survival, and we will change in order to be able to survive. And if we have a family history where there has been years of experiences that have been traumatic experiences, then our DNA will start to adjust a little bit so that we are better able to cope with those, with the assumption we're going to have them, which really, if you think about it, it's heartbreaking, right? It's really heartbreaking, but it's a survival technique. Yeah, and so again, being able to learn that, often all we need is the information. And once we understand what's going on, then we can work through it. But it's when we don't understand and we don't know.
Yes. And it's liberating to know, because you can, like you said, you can work with it. You can go, I'm in a freeze response right now. I don't even fully have to know why or what exactly triggered it. Was it the way they walked? Was it that they slammed the door? Like, I don't have to know why. It just is happening.
Yeah.
And then you can be liberated to work through it.
Yes.
So my understanding with epigenetic too is that it's different than intergenerational, because maybe it wasn't extended directly to you from your grandmother or grandmother, but it could show up generations after as a survival response. I think we saw that through the pandemic when people made sauerkraut. That was totally epigenetic resiliency tactics.
Yes, exactly. And when you think about that, it's amazing, really. Hey, like, again, we're really designed to survive. Yeah.
So then what is intergenerational trauma?
So intergenerational trauma then becomes more of that learned behavior, right? Where it's, again, just using my own just personal experience, right? I think about my grandmother, and I think about the trauma that she experienced through the residential school system and the colonization of Canada, and the impact that I had on her. And then how it impacted her parenting abilities, her coping skills, all sorts of different things. And then some of that then had an impact on my mother, right? And even though my mom didn't actually go to residential school, she had that intergenerational trauma, the effect of that, because of my grandmother's, her hurts, right? And the harm that had happened to her. And then my mom passed that on to my brothers and myself, not meaning to, right? And not nearly the thing in my particular family, that intergenerational trauma, we are starting to see where we're healing that as well. And that's the other thing, right? Is we want to make sure when we're talking about trauma, we remember that we don't have to get stuck in it. Right? It doesn't have to define us for the rest of our lives. And my mom did some things to try to do that differently. But there were still some effects there, right? There were some things that she didn't know. Just the other day, even at my old age now, I realized, I woke up in the middle of the night and I realized I was having a dream about a birthday party that I had, of all the silly things. And I hated birthday parties. And I realized I hated birthday parties because my mom didn't know how to do a birthday party. And then I had the realization, oh, of course she didn't realize, no one ever taught her. Right? My mom thought you just invite your friends over and they take care of themselves.
Yeah.
And I remember I had a girlfriend who was the same age, I think I was in like grade 3, and her mom, like, they had games, all sorts of fun stuff for us to do, and our birthdays were right beside each other. And I remember for a long time I was just like this angry little girl at my mom because I didn't have a good birthday. But she just didn't know how.
It wasn't modeled, because we're modeling
modeled, and that's that intergenerational, right? Where she didn't know how to do that. And it's not because she didn't want to. It's not because she didn't have the desire to. Who was she going to ask?
Yeah.
There was no one really for her to reach out to and say, hey, how do I do this? So like many of us, she just tried to fake it, right? And do the best that she could. And then there were some effects for my brothers and I, and then some for our children, and now I have grandchildren. And each time I see, though, that we're just a little more healed and a little more healed, and they say it takes 7, so yeah.
Is intergenerational and generational trauma the same when people use those terms?
That is such a good question, Aurora, and I'm not even sure I know the answer to it.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
I know
Let's see, intergenerate, I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just see both terms, so then I wondered.
Yeah.
So I have these great cards.
Ah, okay.
They're cards against inequity, and so I'll pull a random one, and then it's like a discussion. I know I've heard you talk about these. This is a great card. So it says, what are attitudinal barriers? So it says stereotyping, assuming that persons with disabilities have a poor quality of life or that they are unhealthy because of their impairments. Stigma, prejudice, and discrimination means these attitudes may come from people's ideas related to disability. Someone may see disability as a personal tragedy or as an indication of the lack of ability to behave as expected in society. By thinking of disability as a social responsibility to provide support to all people so they can live independent and full lives, we can work to recognize and address challenges that all people, including those with disabilities, experience. And I guess when it comes to having trauma-informed practice, do you think that there's still a common perception when people have trauma, or we're saying, oh, we've got to support people with trauma? Do you think there's still assumptions that they're impaired in some way?
100%.
Okay.
And I still think that there's assumptions that impairment is going to affect them for the rest of their lives, right? I do think that there is still a lot of stigma around. Even if you think about another really coping for a trauma is substance use disorder. For example, I think that lots of times people, they see the substance use and they don't necessarily see the trauma underneath it. That substance actually was a solution for quite a while. Right? And there's a lot of ideas around that will always, the person will never really heal from that.
So how can we create trauma-informed spaces then if it's from a perspective that somebody's impaired? So we're doing this because of an impairment. And also on the other side of that, if everyone has some level of trauma, the average ACE score is a 2 in Canada. So if a lot of people have trauma, then we're saying, then we're almost discriminating ourselves.
Totally. And that self-discrimination or that self-stigma is actually one of the most damaging for us, really, because that is one of the biggest ones that will stop us from reaching out and getting help. Sometimes we can work through the societal stigma, and we're getting there, right? Because we're talking about trauma and we're talking about all of these different things in a much more informed way, that we are starting to unpack that a little bit. But for a lot of people, that's for them. That's for the them out there, and there's still me here. Right? And that self-stigma is still a huge barrier for a lot of people. It's okay for you to get help. I support you getting help, but I'm fine, thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what would the shift be then? So if we're going, okay, we care about trauma-informed spaces that we can create, we care about trauma-informed practice and what that means, and service providers in the community can think, okay, what little steps can I make? But first it sounds like there needs to be a shift in perspective. And what would that shift be?
I think that I think in order for us to be able to, as authentically as possible, provide trauma-informed care, we have to have also done our own work in here, right? And when we've done our work inside, then we are in a way better place to help somebody else. And that's the really tricky one, right? Because so often we want to be the helper. We don't want to be the one needing to be healed.
Right.
I think lots of times if we can just remember that actually we all have something, right? No one in this world is getting away scot-free.
No.
We all have some burden that we have to bear, or something that we're carrying. Like we all have something. And when we're able to acknowledge that, you know what, I'm carrying my stuff too, I don't have to be as judgmental. I'm more open to you carrying your stuff, I think, if that makes, is that clear? Yeah. Yeah.
But even before doing that personal inner work, there's still that shift in perspective from having trauma means there's an impairment.
Yes, and I think that, like, again, I think that's where, I think one of the big shifts of perception then is if we can start looking at the trauma experience versus the trauma response, right? Because that trauma experience, that's really where the impairment that we can never heal is. Because we can never change whatever happened, right? We can never go back and make that experience not be there, or make it that whatever happened didn't happen, right? But we all, what we actually have the power to do is we all have the power to heal. That is something we all can do.
And it's remarkable.
And so, yeah, and you can, when you see it in other people, when you feel it in yourself and you see it in other people, it's amazing. And that's why this work is so important, and allowing our institutions to be trauma informed so that people have that opportunity to be empowered, to grow, to heal from that. Then that's when we start to change that perception.
Yeah.
Right? Because instead of looking at it as, oh, that poor person had this, right? We look at, wow, look at what they're doing, right? Look at how well they are in their life.
Yes.
Yeah. And that can be different. But what wellness looks like too will be different for everybody. So start to make sure we're not making sure that the bar isn't here, and if you're here, you're not well enough.
That's right.
Yeah.
In the inclusivity episode, I brought up Joseph Campbell's The Hero's Journey, because I think it's just such a powerful framing around reshaping someone's story and not seeing it as an impairment. Because if a person's able to heal and grow and overcome, they are a hero.
Absolutely.
And that might look different for everyone. Like someone's ability to overcome would then show up differently in different ways.
Exactly. And we would be able to start to learn how to support those different ways and to celebrate those. And and then that's really where we start to change that perspective. And we start looking at this, and we start looking at where we are here. And celebrating that wherever that is.
So strong. You're so brave. Look at you, you went through this, and now you did the hard work and you faced it, and you're here. And I think if we visibly showed that, more people would enter their journey, but also feel safer to enter their journey or be wherever they're at in the journey.
And feel safer to even, to enter that journey and to start telling those stories, right? I recently was in one of our small communities here in the north it was actually a mental health first aid I was doing, and they had an elder in there, and she started to tell a little bit of her story, right? So she shared a lot of her pain and with our group. And I remember just going up, and she reminded me of my grandma, because my grandma was just a little lady, right? She was tough as anything, but just a little lady. And she reminded me of her, and I went up and I was like, wow, so, you have 100% success rate of surviving difficult situations, hey? 100%. And she just did what you did, and she had this little smile, and it was just so empowering, like for everybody, right? For all of us. It was just so heartwarming that we don't have to get stuck over here, right? Let's celebrate being over here, and whatever happened, whatever, right? But when we heal from it, it's so beautiful.
I see so many people doing the work and trying so hard, but when they're not given that experience of being celebrated, breaks my heart. Because they would do so much better if they were seen.
I know, and
as victors or or encouraged up that mountain.
And we just start where we start. We just start where we are, and no one gets to the top of the mountain in one day.
No.
Right? And I always say, I talk about courage, and courage being doing something despite the fear. Right? And when I think about that, it's everybody, anytime we're doing something hard, we're going to have fear. And if we can just be in places and have support around us so that we can do it despite the fear, that's really the courage, right? And none of us get there in one day. It's just little steps, and all of them should be celebrated. If you're right, when we celebrate those, it's like a little baby, right? If they took those first steps and we picked them up and said, no, you're not ready for that yet, or this is not for you, right? We don't do that with our little children. We say, yay, we support them and we help them, and they fall lots, and we pick them up, and we don't get mad at them when they fall. We just, and we get them up and we support them through that journey. But when we're talking about people healing from trauma, sometimes we don't have that same patience, or we don't celebrate where they're at, or we get frustrated when they have that little fall.
And recognize that they could be enduring so much every day.
And we don't know.
We don't know.
We have no idea. And that's the other, I think, really important part, is we really don't know what did it take for that person to walk in that day, right?
Yeah.
What did it take for that person to get out of bed that day, right?
So the importance of that trauma-informed.
Yeah, because how many times did they walk back and forth in front of that door before they finally went and opened the door? And then did we welcome them? Or did we have a bunch of signs, take your shoes off, do this, don't do this, don't do this, where they felt like, oh, I don't actually fit here.
Yeah.
And they walked back out again.
I think about that when people might go to return to school.
Yeah.
And that takes such courage and bravery, especially if there's been any kind of self-esteem or self-worth due to their challenges. And so how crucial it is if people see them and encourage them and allow them to make mistakes as they figure it out.
Yeah, yeah. And you know that allowing ourselves and each other to make mistakes too, we have become this society where we're all supposed to know something. Hey? We're all supposed to know how to do it. Whatever it is, where we should know how to do it. And then that makes it so difficult for people to say, but I don't actually know how to do this. And but when it's not okay, it's I don't know how to do that. So before anybody notices, I'm sneaking out of here. And I didn't like that anyways. And that stops us.
Okay, so what got you so interested in doing the work that you do? Like, you did share a bit of your story. Is that really a key part that motivated you to get into the line of work, or?
Yeah, I think that my own sort of story is a big part of what motivated me to get into the work. And I think just really that desire to make a difference, right? Like I just think that there's so much potential, and I've always felt like that there's just so much potential. And how do we help people like just to get there, right? And I don't mean potential in money or car, like not any, or better jobs or anything like that. I just mean so much potential in being able to just wake up in the morning and have an authentic smile.
Yeah.
And feeling that we belong, because we all actually belong.
Yeah.
And and I think that is so important.
So what part of your story made you very grounded in this knowing about belonging?
I think that part of what happened was my mom actually, like I say, she did really try a lot. So there was a lot of support there in desire. Does that make sense? Like there was a lot of love there. So that was very helpful. And then I think that the other thing really that helped me was I started doing this work at a very young age when I was still just in my early 20s. I had just a little baby at home, and I started doing some volunteer work at the crisis center, and that's when I really just began my journey of not only my own healing, but of understanding just people and learning to not have to compare myself to everybody all the time, and just all of that. I think that really started my journey, was just that giving back is actually what it was. And I think giving back is so healing for us, and we don't even know it, right? I think I started giving back so that I could feel good about me, but I didn't, oh, look at me kind of thing, right? I do this volunteer work, but really I got so much more out of it than I ever gave anybody. Yeah.
And so belonging for you was also purpose and being part of a place and part of something that mattered.
Something that mattered, yeah, and where we were giving back and where we were helping. And because again, I think that we all have something, right? Nobody gets away scot-free. We all have our things, and if we can just accept that. And I also believe coming from a place of love is really important. Right? And that acceptance is also so vital.
You said something key earlier about people being able to be receptive to individuals with trauma, but also to do the inner work. And so I think it's really key, because you said, okay, so you need to do your inner work first. But often what we're seeing right now, and as this series has been about equity, inclusion, anti-racism, being trauma-informed, all these things that are very key, and many people are being asked to be these things, and so they get presented with that first, and then they go, whoa, why is this even bringing something up for me? I don't even understand why I'm uncomfortable or I'm resistant or it's all too much too fast. Because then they're needing to do that inner work, but it's the reverse of what you're saying. And so I'm very curious about that, because is it ideal to make something like trauma-informed mandated to learn, or is it something that we need to gracefully choose as people in our own groups where we're working from?
And I think, again, you know what we'll find, Aurora, I believe, and I don't know because I don't have a crystal ball, but I believe that even if we mandate it, we will have our people that have the ability to get all the check boxes checked off in order to be able to, in the checkbox, be trauma informed. But are they able to implement it if there was too much of a barrier here to work through at the time? So even though I say we need to work on this first, I know that for many of us, myself included, we get into the work and then we do the inner work, right? We get into the work on the outside, and that's what really starts to trigger, there's something here for me. I thought I was good.
Yeah.
And so I think that the other thing is, again, having those conversations around that, right? And having that support for each other. That it's okay if you've been doing this work for 10, 15 years and you're just realizing this thing about yourself today. That's okay. That's okay, because we're all just where we are, and we move on from there. Yeah.
What advice would you give to, say, policymakers in the local community or the province, or leaders that are now saying, hey, employees, you should get trauma informed? How would you recommend that they approach that?
So I think that what they have to do is first of all, they have to be supportive of their employees. And they have to remember that for some of their employees, that they're suddenly saying, you need to be trauma informed, and now they're having a whole conversation about trauma and identifying it. For some of their employees, that's going to be very difficult, right? And so there's going to need to also be that support for some of their employees, not everybody, right? But some of them are going to maybe go take a couple steps back, and they might need some extra support in understanding, because now a light is on their own trauma. Remember, we talked about sometimes you can forget about it, or you minimize it so much. And then when we start talking about, this is what trauma is, this is how that can affect you. If you are doing this, that might be a trauma response, or if a client is coming in, that might be a trauma response. And now your employee is, but that's me. Right? That's actually me. And so how are we supporting our employee to be able to say, hey, I actually need something here. And so that's going to have to be part of it for sure. So we want to be able to make sure that we're walking carefully and remembering that again, that idea that most people have experienced trauma of some sort. And that will include our employees, that we're now asking them to do something that they might not be ready to do yet or willing to do. And so we need to be supportive of them too through their journey. And how do we help support them so that they become, or can, if they can, we can support them to hopefully choose to find ways to work through that.
It truly needs to trickle down for all, or bottom up and top down.
It has to be a cycle, right? Yeah. Everything has to be a cycle. And then we keep bringing it back. We bring it back and we start here, and then when we get there, then let's take it up a notch, right? And then let's look at this. Yeah. And so we start where we're at, and then we just walk gently and tread that carefully.
So can we get into the thick of it a little more? What exactly is trauma-informed practice, and some tangibles?
Okay, so again, what trauma-informed practice is, it's that understanding that, again, anybody coming through the door, we don't know what they're bringing with them. And so we want to have that idea that we don't know. And so we don't want to be just going from this idea of looking at their behavior and then putting it into a box and making a judgment on it. That trauma-informed is really, again, not what's wrong with you, what happened to you. And being able to understand that, and then really looking at how are we as an organization, as an agency, what is our approach? What's our mandate? Are we even thinking about this? Or are we so caught up in, you need this form, and you need this form, and you need this form, and this has to be done, and this has to be done before you can even do anything else, that people get lost in that, right? So is there a way that we can maybe do something else to help support so those forms could get filled out?
Yeah.
and really just having a bigger look at. And again, that's that place where we start within, right? And whether it's an agency, we have that real magnifying glass on what are we actually doing here? What are we doing that is helpful for people and supportive when they come in? And even just thinking about people are first coming in, so many of our places we have like our security guard there because we know of some past experiences that have happened and we need to keep safe and all of that. But is our security guard like right up in front in people's faces? Are they just to the side? We can manage some of that, right? We can help that feel a little bit more supportive for people coming in. Are we, when someone is coming in and they're asking questions about how long is it going to be or what's the timing, are we also using some empathy just in those early conversations to help support people? Do we have water available? A little thing like water, right? Can we, in case somebody, just those little things, for those little comforts can make a big difference when we're thinking about changing into being trauma informed.
Sometimes it can be postural or how a person is holding themselves. So our tones.
Yep, our tones are very important. Smiling. Who's your front counter person? We often think of our front counter person as when we're thinking, okay, we put this much emphasis on hiring this manager and this manager and this clinician and this person, and it's so we don't worry too much about who's at the front counter, but actually our front counter person is one of our most important people.
Yeah.
They set the tone. Right? So did we tell them that? Did we tell them how important they are and how valuable they are to us and how much we appreciate the way in which when people come in, they set the tone right off the bat? And are we supporting them so that when they feel like, yeah, I'm the person here, but I'm getting all of it, right? Are we giving them some support for that so that they don't turn out where Joe walks in and before he's even up there, they've rolled their eyes and not being mean to them, it's just they're just human too, right? And they only have so much capacity that they might have in that given day. Yeah, because our tone of voice and again, that smile and that welcoming.
That it's safe.
That it's safe. We're happy that you're here.
Because then the nervous system is able to regulate that person if they're in a heightened nervous system state.
Yes, and we know that people with an experience of trauma or if they're unhoused or anything like that, often their baseline is higher than someone else's baseline. So their baseline place is already in a trauma response.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's where they live now. And so it doesn't take as much for them to go a step above, right? Yeah.
Which then starts showing certain behavior.
Exactly, yeah.
So there's de-escalation measures, and I know some people take specific de-escalation type courses in their frontline work, but what are some standard de-escalation measures other than the tone and the smiling that you talk about? Are there ways if you notice somebody starts to get very agitated, is there some of your best tips for that?
I think if someone is getting agitated, so they're getting louder, you get quieter.
Okay.
It's the opposite of Michelle Obama. When they go low, we go high. Right? Yeah. When they go high, we go low.
Okay.
And just slowing your voice down, calming it, and then they'll start that can also help to match. The other thing is that sometimes, again, when we come from that place of understanding that we don't know what this person has been through, then we don't need to necessarily control or be afraid of what's going on for them. And it allows us to come from a place of empathy. Right? So what do you need, right? How can I help you right now? And then maybe if I can't do that, then what can I do? And when possible, try and give a yes answer. Are you guys ever going to see me? Instead of, no, we're not going to see you until you calm down. It can be yes, absolutely, and we're trying our hardest to get there. Would you like a glass of water while you wait, or is there anything else I can do to make you comfortable? If you give me a second, I'll go in the back and I'll just double check how much longer it'll be. Right? You can go around the corner and you can breathe. You don't have to ask anybody because you know it's still going to be a while, right? But you can breathe and you can regulate yourself. And then you can come out and say, yeah, they're working really hard back there. What can I do for you in the meantime? And just those little things make such a difference. Yeah, as opposed to, I don't know how long it'll be. Can you see how many people are here? That's how long it will be. Yeah.
So we talked a bit about the human interaction, face-to-face service scenarios. What are other spaces that can be trauma-informed? Say, how would you make it of an establishment more trauma-informed if someone was looking at the way they do procedures? Or how could a classroom become more trauma-informed?
So again, just being aware of making sure that the space is comfortable, right? Does it feel safe? Is it when people walk in, do they get welcomed? Right? Or is everybody sitting there not sure of what's going on, and we don't know what's going to happen next, and then all of a sudden someone breezes in and starts barking orders at people? Those kinds of things can. One of the other things when we're thinking about being trauma informed, another really important piece is, are we telling people what to expect?
Yeah.
Do people know what we're going to be doing?
Yeah.
So that they know if we say we're going to start on 9, then we need to make sure we're starting on 9 for those people who now it's 9:10. Am I in the wrong place? What's going on? And they don't know how, they're in trauma, so it's too hard to say, ask any questions because of all of that, right? Making sure that people know what to expect, and then we're following through with what we say that we're going to do. And trying to, again, are we even introducing each other? Are we sharing any stories, or are we just being told and moved along from here to here without any information or understanding of what's going on?
Yeah.
Sometimes it just takes a couple of minutes just to explain, this is why we're doing this, or this is going to be the procedure, this is what this is going to look like. And people are like, oh, okay, and they feel safe right away.
Yeah.
Yeah. One thing that I've started to incorporate in some of the training is there's not a test after this training from the beginning, because recently I've had a lot of people, the middle of day 2, they're like, is there a test today? And I'm like, oh, I realized this poor person's probably been stressed since before they even got into the course about the test.
Yeah.
The test that doesn't even exist. So that was another new learning for me of trauma-informed classroom. If there is a test, what is it? Or there's no test. And now they can just learn. They don't have to be busy trying to memorize. Something can hit here instead of just here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What about too understanding your power positionality, because it's making me think about power and how if you're an authority over a subject matter or an area that a person is at, then they will have a trauma response if they've had abuses of power.
Yes.
And so how can people working with other people understand their power positionality? What does that even mean?
And I think that just understanding that when we're in a position, we are in a position of power. When we are the employee, when we're the worker and they're the client, there's power imbalance there. And so we just understand that there will be a power imbalance in all of our work situations with clients, right? And so we need to make sure that we are acknowledging that, and then that we're respectful of that. And we can just, by being kind and slowing down and being authentic and offering water, asking how are you doing, instead of did you get that paperwork filled out, do you have your form, it's, oh Joe, how are you doing today, I'm happy to see you, did you need a glass of water, how did it feel out in the waiting room, were you okay out there? Just those little kind of things right at the beginning help them so that they can feel like, okay, you're not just staring at me, judging me, asking me, making me pull out my stuff right away and making sure it's all right and all of that, right? That we're just and it doesn't take a lot of time. It's just a few minutes, just those small little things where I'm actually a person, you're a person, and I'm just here to help you, right? I'm not better than you. I'm not trying to steal anything from you or take anything from you or prove that I'm better than you. I'm just in this role just to help you.
It's really worthwhile to unpack power dynamics a little more too, and even the neuroscience behind why would that strike a trauma response, what exactly is going on, if there is, what is a healthy power dynamic versus an unhealthy power dynamic. So when you say no matter what, when you're helping someone, you are already in a place of power. And especially if they're relying on you even more, is there a spectrum of the amount of power that you have, and how can we define that and look at it? Were a lot of questions all over.
And I think really we like understanding whether we're in an academic situation and you have the power to say pass or fail, that's a huge power dynamic. But it's also a huge power dynamic when you're holding the keys to the housing unit, right? Or you've got the form to fill out for social assistance, or you've got the ability to say, yes, you're going to get this grant, or no, you're not going to get it, right? Those are huge power imbalances. And being able to, and sometimes we do, like there are situations where the answer has to be no. or the mark has to be an F, right? Like those realities do happen, but the way in which we approach that can also have a huge impact for that person of, am I an F or was this mark an F? Right? Was this personal about me, or what can I do? How do I change this? And if that information is shared at the same time, there's that part where we're empowering people. And really, when we're in a power position, our goal then should be to empower others, right? That's why that should be the goal, versus I need to stay in my power position. And then again, that's where we look at ourselves, right? If I feel like I need to stay in my power position, how come?
And does that give that person a dopamine hit? If they're abusing power,
Oh, totally.
they get a dopamine rush from it.
Yeah.
Is that what keeps them doing those kinds of abuses?
Whatever they're getting from it, right? They're getting some sort of something from it. And it could be that they, again, their own trauma story where they were so disempowered at some part in time in their life. Right? And without even knowing it, it's not often a conscious choice. It's not like the person is consciously being like, I am going to make this person feel not very good today. It's more a need that they have to feel better.
And powerful.
And powerful, yeah. And we all actually on some level have a need to feel powerful. And not powerful in this mean, aggressive sense, but that we are empowered, that we have some sort of control over our environment and what's happening for us, or at least what's happening with our emotions and our internal, right? And when we feel like we don't even have control over that and someone else has the power, it can feel very disempowering for that person. And if I'm unhealthy, it feels great for me. So we want to make sure that if we are noticing that, what's going on? Right? And if we're seeing that, what's going on? And again, if we're seeing that in a colleague, we want to make sure that we're once again walking that very carefully, right? Because we understand that our colleague who is maybe misusing their power, instead of being like, you're bad, right? You need to stop doing this. It's like, how come? Right?
Curiosity.
Being really, always, that's the other really big piece of trauma, is being curious, right? And identifying a behavior, and instead of judging it or trying to stop it, before we even do that, or after we do that, once we realize that's what we're doing, then be really curious of, okay, what's going on? How do I support this person then? How do I support this person so that they can stay in their role and actually start to feel better about it? Because actually the secret is, and a lot of people don't know this, if we come from our power place of needing to have power to be better over somebody else to fill that need actually gets filled in a much more fulfilling way when we get it from empowering others. Versus and when we get it from disempowering others. It feels like it's tricky, right? Like it feels like this is powerful, but this actually is way more, we get way more and more like dopamine from that, and serotonin and those other sort of chemicals that help keep us in our happy places, right? Sometimes if we're, because then the other thing too is if we're getting our dopamine and our empowerment through disempowering others, then we always have to be on the lookout for who's coming that we might not be able to do that with. Right? And how do we guard against those other people? And then that we're keeping ourselves triggered, then we're not safe, because there might be someone coming along with more power than us soon. But when our goal is that we're just empowering others, and that's how we're getting our feelings, we're getting that feeling that is hitting that and meeting that, then it doesn't matter if what can I learn from you then? Help me get where you are, because then together we can do even better. And it's a way different way of being and just experiencing our lives.
So trauma-informed would require vulnerable, real conversations, uncomfortable conversations around power. And how can employers and how can employees do those self-checks or bring up those conversations in safe ways, in trauma-informed ways in the work environment?
Yeah, and that really, like each work environment is going to have to look at, again, where are we right now? Because where are we right now is really going to be able to help inform what's our next step. If we don't know where we are right now, it's hard to know what our next step is going to be. But if we find that where we are right now, maybe we're just about there, then it's just a matter of having some more conversation and bringing that up together as a group, because we're just about there anyways. If we realize, okay, we're like way back here, we might need to bring in some help. We might need to bring in somebody from the outside who can help support us having these conversations. Maybe even in the beginning, separating our employees from our managers and being able to build that and then bring people together. But again, it all has to start with where are we right now? And having that ability to see that. And even if we're not even sure how do we even start there, there are different things, different tools, psychologically health and safe workplaces, for example. There's the Guarding Minds tool, which is an anonymous survey that you can get your staff to fill out. That might give you an example. You can do, it's great, it touches on all the 12 recommendations for the standard, and through questions that your employees will answer, and then you can gather that information. It can give you an idea of where we are now in a way that the staff can often answer it.
I'll put that as a reference in the credits.
Yeah. Because then if we're not sure where we are, then we can use a tool to help us find that. And then from there, you just got to figure out, okay, do we need to bring somebody else in that can help, or is this something that we think we can manage within house? Yeah.
And you'll know, because if you even bring up healthy use of power or uncomfortable conversations, if it's too much, it would start to really rupture this people's psyche a bit.
You'll notice right away if you start to bring up and nobody's talking.
Yeah.
No one is saying anything. Everybody's looking down there. Obviously, they don't feel safe to even where the level that you're at right now. There's not that safety there. Yeah. So you're going to have to step back a level. And then you have to step back until you're at a place where we can start to move forward.
Nice.
Yeah.
And that's hoping that leadership values that.
That's all hoping that leadership values that. Yeah.
But it truly is something to be valued. I feel like us having safer spaces benefits all.
And the other thing too is we don't always have to have leadership to value that. If leadership doesn't value that, then we can go in and we can start with one step at a time and we can model it. Yeah. And we can one person can go in and say, tomorrow at my work, I'm going to start this little bit of a conversation, or I'm going to put up this sign on my desk, or I'm going to do this, and I'm going to tell someone that I've done this. And then it starts to go from the bottom up, and management finally says, oh, we need to catch up here. People are asking for this and they want this, so how do we support them?
I'm grateful you brought that up. Is there anything else you would want to share in your wisdom for others around trauma-informed?
I just think that I think we're more similar than we are different, right? And I think that when we can remember that and we can take the time, if I'm having a problem with you, what's going on for me? Right? And I think that can be a really big place to start. Or if I'm finding that something is I'm always fighting against something, or something is really always uncomfortable, how can I look at that? And who do I have that I can be safe, that I can talk to? The other thing is, when we talk about healing, sometimes healing, we do need support through our healing, right? Especially when we're talking about trauma and we're talking about healing some of those old stories and those old pains and hurts. It's okay to get someone to put our hand up and have someone help walk us through that. Because if we would have been able to walk through it, we would have walked through it a long time ago. So if we're not walking through it and we're stuck somehow, maybe it's okay to say, can someone help me walk through this? I'm looking at the muck, I can see it's there, and I'm tired of being on this side of it.
So I'm really hearing you say, if you have the skills to be trauma-informed for yourself, you will have the skills to be trauma-informed for others.
100%, yeah. And then that's where it starts. That's exactly where it starts. Just one person in the agency that starts to make a difference.
Amazing. And you make a huge difference. And thank you for all of the meaningful work that you do in the North.
Thanks, Aurora, and thank you for what you're doing too, right? Like it takes a lot of courage and a lot of vulnerability to put yourself out and to share the stories and do the work. So good job.
Yeah, thank you.